You know, when all those requests came pouring in for a deep dive on the Young Sug case, I was like, all right, we got to do this. This whole thing has just been like so captivating. It's been going on forever, right?
It really has. Just the sheer length of this trial alone is like unheard of. It's the longest criminal trial in Georgia history, officially.
Whoa, the longest. Okay, so we're talking about a seriously complex case here for anyone who might have, missed some of the headlines. Let's start with the basics. Who are we talking about? What happened?
Yeah, so we're talking Young Thug, the Grammy-winning rapper,
Right.
real name Jeffrey Lamar Williams. He recently took a plea deal in this massive RICO case. It's been going on since May 2022, actually.
RICO, huh? Now, didn't RICO, wasn't that initially created for organized crime, like the mafia and such?
Exactly, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. RICO, meant to go after the big guys, the leaders, not just like individual crimes, but the whole enterprise.
So how did RICO come into play with Young Thug? What were the charges against him? What was the plea deal?
Well, the charges back in May 2022, they were pretty wide-ranging. Conspiracy to violate RICO, participation in a street gang, then a bunch of drug and weapons charges. It was a lot.
Sounds pretty serious. So he ended up taking this plea deal, right? What did that mean for him exactly?
Yeah, he pled guilty to one RICO violation and then entered a nolo contendere plea for the other charges.
Nola contendere. So he's not saying he did it, but he's accepting the punishment, right?
Exactly. And get this, it was a non-negotiated plea. Pretty unusual, actually.
Non-negotiated. So that means the judge had total say in the sentencing.
Yep, that's right. And the judge sentenced him to time served plus 15 years probation, and he gets to be on house arrest.
Time served. That's huge, right? He was locked up for a while waiting for this whole thing to play out.
It is, it is. It's a big win for him and his lawyers. But, you hear from his family and his attorney, and there's relief, obviously, but there's also this feeling that they wanted to fight, to clear his name completely.
I can understand that. It's not like he's totally exonerated. All right, so let's get into what the prosecution was saying. What was their main argument against Young Thug?
Their main argument was that Young Thug was a leader of this street gang. They called it Young Slime Life, YSL, operating in Fulton County, Georgia.
YSL. Okay, so they're saying this gang exists, but they didn't stop there, right? They made some pretty strong statements about, the impact of this group on the community.
Right. The deputy DA, Adrienne Love, she argued that YSL had basically been, running things on Cleveland Avenue for years, creating this atmosphere of fear and violence, pulling young people into crime. It was pretty damning.
Okay, so if they're trying to take down YSL, how did they tie Young Thug to it? What was their proof?
And this is where things get really interesting, kind of controversial. They used his lyrics, his music, and his social media posts.
Wait, hold on. They used his music, in court as evidence.
Yeah. And that's what really set people off. Free speech advocates, artists, everybody was up in arms.
I can see why. Isn't, creative expression supposed to be protected? It's not like a confession or something.
That's exactly what the defense argued. They said, look, his lyrics are art. They're not like a diary of his life. It's storytelling, metaphor. You can't take it literally.
So is this where the Protect Black Art movement comes in?
Exactly. This case really brought that whole movement to the forefront. Artists, especially in hip hop, they felt like they were being targeted, their music, which often tells the stories of marginalized communities, was being used to criminalize them.
That's a good point. It makes you wonder if using lyrics like this will, scare artists into not speaking their minds, they'll be afraid to be honest in their music.
That's the worry. This chilling effect on artistic freedom. It's a valid concern. We can definitely get into that more later.
Okay, so even with all of that, the judge still allowed the lyrics to be used as evidence.
He did. Judge Glanville ruled that they were admissible. So you had this really, really unique situation. Art being analyzed and judged under a legal microscope. And that framework, it's not always equipped to handle the nuances of art.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Pretty much.
So we've got this backdrop of artistic freedom versus this huge RICO case. And remember, this wasn't just about Young Thug, right? There were a lot of other people caught up in this indictment.
Yeah, you're right. This wasn't just a solo act. This was huge. 28 people initially named in this case. Shows you the scale of what the prosecution was alleging.
28 people. Wow. So what happened to all of them?
Well, that's a story for after we take a quick moment to gather our thoughts. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Right. 28 people in the initial indictment. A whole lot of lives caught up in this.
So what happened to everyone else named in this case?
Well, a lot of them ended up taking plea deals, to avoid going to trial. It happens a lot in these big RICO cases. Yeah, I guess a trial this big with so many people involved, it would have been a total mess.
Oh, for sure. And, I mean, for some people, the thought of a longer sentence if they're found guilty at trial, that's a big risk. So a plea deal, it's a way to wrap things up quicker, maybe get a lighter sentence.
So plea deals for some. What about the others? Did anyone actually go to trial with Young Thug?
Yeah, a few of them did. Young Thug ended up standing trial with 5 others.
Okay, so let's get back to the whole lyrics as evidence thing. You were saying how controversial it was. What did the defense say about that? How did they try to fight it?
They fought hard. Their main argument was that, look, art, especially hip-hop, it's about storytelling, metaphor. It's not meant to be taken literally.
It's like, imagine judging a novelist based on what their characters do. That's crazy.
Exactly. It's a dangerous precedent. You can't equate creative expression with real-life criminal intent.
And this is what led to the whole Protect Black Art movement, right?
Yeah, it really gained momentum during this trial. You had all these artists, especially in the hip-hop community, saying, hey, this is wrong. Our work is being twisted and used against us.
There must have been a lot of fear, right? Like, this could set a precedent for how Black artists are treated.
Oh, absolutely. They were saying, look, hip-hop comes from Black culture. It reflects the realities of our communities. You can't just take these lyrics and use them to criminalize us.
So it's not just about artistic freedom in general. It's about recognizing the cultural context.
Right. The Protect Black Art movement brought that perspective to the forefront.
It makes you realize that the legal system, it's not always equipped to handle the complexities of art, especially when it comes from communities that have been, historically marginalized.
Exactly. You've got 2 worlds colliding here. The legal world, which is all about facts and evidence, and the world of art, which is all about emotion and metaphor and, not always being so literal.
Yeah, trying to fit art into a neat legal box, it just doesn't work.
It can lead to some serious misunderstandings.
And maybe even unjust outcomes.
For sure. And that's what worries people about this case. What kind of message does this send? Could it make artists afraid to express themselves, to avoid certain topics because they're worried about legal trouble?
And that's a big loss, right? Art has the power to challenge us, to make us think in new ways. If artists start holding back, we all miss out.
I completely agree. This case has really brought all of these issues to the surface. It's forcing us to think about how we value art, how we protect it, especially in a society where the lines between legal and illegal are constantly being tested.
And you mentioned earlier that this whole thing with the lyrics, it's not just a hip-hop issue, right? Other artists could be impacted too.
Absolutely. Think about country music, folk music, rock. All of them have songs that deal with, tough subjects, violence, drugs, heartbreak. What's to stop prosecutors from taking those lyrics out of context, too?
It's slippery slope.
It is. A lot of legal experts and free speech advocates are watching this case very closely. They're worried that it could weaken the First Amendment protections for artistic expression.
So it's not just about music either, right? What about books, movies, even video games? Could they be next?
Potentially. The same legal principles could be applied to other art forms. If lyrics are fair game, why not dialogue from a movie? Or a scene from a video game?
It makes you wonder, where do we draw the line? What happens to fiction?
You've hit on a really important point. This case is blurring the lines between fiction and reality in a way that could have huge implications.
This has been, wow, a lot to think about. We need a moment to process all this. We'll be right back with our final thoughts on this Young Thug case. Man, we've really gone deep on this Young Thug case, haven't we? It's like way bigger than just some celebrity trial. This is about like the foundations of art and law, freedom of speech,
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big takeaways here is our legal system, it doesn't really have a good way to handle art. How do you interpret art in a courtroom?
Right. It's almost like using, a chainsaw to perform surgery, the wrong tool for the job.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what has everybody so worried. If we're not careful, we could end up turning art into a crime. And that would just kill creativity.
One thing that's been on my mind is the bias issue, especially with hip hop. It often comes from, communities that have been marginalized. Do you think certain types of art or art from certain communities are more likely to be misunderstood in court?
That's a really good point. Bias exists everywhere, right? Yeah. Even in the legal system. And when you're dealing with art that, challenges the status quo, that comes from a different perspective, there's always that risk of misinterpretation.
So what can we do about it? How do we make sure the legal system understands art, especially when it comes from communities that have been stereotyped or, haven't always been treated fairly?
Well, I think education is a good place to start. We need judges, lawyers, juries who are like culturally aware, who understand the context. They need to be able to look at a piece of art and understand the intent, the artistic style, all of that before they decide if it's criminal or not.
So it's not just about knowing the law, it's about knowing art too.
Exactly. Maybe even bringing in like experts from the art world to explain things to the court. We need more communication between the legal world and the art world.
It's like we need a whole new type of lawyer, someone who specializes in art and law.
Right. Someone who can speak both languages.